Do you think they have the self-awareness of how goofy they come off arguing against a movie that's trying to stop human trafficking? Like, or are they just so detached from the day-to-day person? Like,
you know, because this group these fanatics are watching, you know, it's happening because some people donated tickets, so they're trying to find every reason to not justify success. Why do they have to do that?
Ruslan.
I want to talk to you about, you said you did some work with some anti-human trafficking organizations.
Yeah.
Are you've been keeping up with all this hoopla around the Sound of Freedom and some of the backlash about the Sound of Freedom? Disney selling the Sound of Freedom to Angel Studios and it performing, I think, better than they expected it to.
To hit 100 million.
Yeah, and then the media is like pushing back and all this kind of, and some of that stuff, you know, the lead actor jumped out the window, said some kind of wild stuff about Q and all that kind of stuff. But this is all, the movie was done in 2018. Now it's coming out. And so what do you make of, one, the actual reality of how serious trafficking is?
Yeah, it's serious.
And then two, Hollywood's seeming backlash, mainstream media seeming backlash to a movie that I think we should all acknowledge this is a bad thing.
No, one is a bad thing. I've volunteered with a bunch of different human trafficking nonprofits, all from different political spectrums, right? Like human trafficking nonprofits that are led and primarily by people on the left, human trafficking nonprofits that are led primarily by people on the right, and everything in between, you know what I mean? And I could tell you from working with these different nonprofits and going overseas, you know what I mean, to a place where, or places where Americans go to have underage girls who are being trafficked by traffickers. I could tell you it's real. It's very real. It's evil. It's a $130 billion industry. And here's another thing. When people hear human trafficking, they just think about trafficking. There's so many facets to human trafficking. You got organ harvesting, which is what my film focuses on. And that's what I try to focus on a little bit more because there's so many people that focus on the trafficking side of it. There's drug trafficking. I interviewed a guy who was trafficked trafficked/tricked from Venezuela to Colombia to Mexico with the promise that he would be smuggled into the U.S. As soon as he got to Mexico, he was essentially abducted by the people who told him, hey, come to this Mexican border town and we'll be able to sneak you in. You just got to pay us X amount of dollars. And he was abducted, taken to a house. In that house, there were women that were used for trafficking. The kids were used as mules, drug trafficking, because they're small enough to fit through the tunnels, to get, you know, from Mexico into the U.S. And the men were used for other forms of trafficking as well. So there's different forms of human trafficking, and it's very prevalent and it's very widespread. As a matter of fact.
So that $130 billion number is
worldwide.
Worldwide, all trafficking.
All trafficking, not just trafficking.
Got it.
That's where people confuse. They were like, oh, trafficking, but there's labor trafficking. There's people who are trafficked for labor all around the world. I mean, in Africa, there's mines in Africa where kids are working in these mines and dying. You know what I mean? And they're essentially being used as labor slaves. There's marriage. There's forced marriage, which is a form of trafficking. There's obviously there's blood trafficking, where people are being trafficked for their blood. As a matter of fact, there was a story that came out a few weeks ago, about at Harvard University. There was a guy who was him and his girlfriend were working at the morgue at Harvard University, and they were trafficking body parts and fetuses. True story. You can look that up. Yeah, it's a true story. So there's all these different forms of trafficking lead to that big number. Right. And here in the U.S., it's like a $30 billion plus industry. As a matter of fact, Americans drive the demand for materials that are developed and created with trafficked victims. Right. So it's very, very real. And everybody, regardless of, well, I won't say everybody, but most people, regardless of what side they fall on, right or left, will agree that it's real and it's prominent, and there's stories coming out every single day as it relates to people being discovered. Or there was a story that came out about a month or two ago of this American woman, I believe, who went to Colombia to find love. She met this guy on some dating app. He was a med school student. Dude chopped her up, took her organs, part of her body parts washed up on the beach, and he was selling her organs on the black market on social media.
Jeez.
Right? So this stuff does happen. Now, as far as what's going on in Hollywood, I think that, one, anytime someone or something works outside of the system, I think people are threatened.
Interesting.
That's just my experience. I think, you know, because you had this film that was it was financed and made. Like Disney didn't make the film. That's another thing. Like I knew about that film because I volunteered with OUR. I've went to South America with Tim Ballard in OUR years ago. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And so
and from all accounts, Tim Ballard seems like the real deal.
Yeah, he does.
Because they're trying to like smear him and saying like, oh, you know, these fake missions and this and that, you know. But from all measurable accounts, it seems like he's the real deal.
Yeah. Well, him and his nonprofit does do good work. Yeah. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And I know because I went down to DR with them, and we were in a slum where the parents sold their daughters to traffickers.
Yeah.
And we were there to talk to the parents about, yo, here's what's going on with your daughters. To this extent, you're screwing them up for the rest of their life. Like, so I know this stuff and what OUR has, does do good work. You know what I mean? I just think that it wasn't expected for, the film to be what it is. And then also I think that the film was made around the time, I'm an independent free market capitalist, so I don't have any bone in the fight as it relates to Democrat or Republican.
Hey, did you know that you can watch videos like this on the Spotify app? We now are on Spotify under Ruslan Bless God Podcast. So if you're driving and you want to go back and forth between listening to the podcast and just the audio or watching the video, consider doing it now on the Spotify app, as well as all podcast platforms. All right, I'll see you over there. Peace.
But I think that there were so many people that were so opposed to Trump, and Trump derangement syndrome, whatever the term is, that I think that anything that he advocated for,
they got to jump on the opposite side of it.
Yeah, or
which
said,
is
hey,
just so stupid.
Yep. And then when there were reports about QAnon and him doing signs and all that stuff, then that amplified it more. And I know that Tim Ballard met with Trump's human trafficking task force, and so I think that because of his affiliation with, from a political standpoint, I think that and Hollywood being primarily liberal, you know what I mean, Democrats for the most part, I think that that's another thing. It's like people are still hanging on to, this is Trump's guy. You know what I mean? Again, I have no bone in the fight. You know what I mean? I don't vote Democrat or Republican. Like, I'm an independent free market capitalist. I really feel like we need a third party that's as strong, that's truly in the center. You know what I mean? But that's a whole nother conversation. But I think that that's what essentially, that's what's going on.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Do you think they have this self-awareness of how goofy they come off arguing against a movie that's trying to stop human trafficking? Like, or are they just so detached from the day-to-day person? Like, yeah, like outside of Q, outside of some of the wild things that Jim Caviezel said over there, like, y'all are crazy pushing back against this movie.
I think at the end of the day, we all have to look at the spirit of the project. It's to bring awareness about a real project. Yeah. And I think that when people are trying to smear it for political reasons or whatever, fill in the blank, it just ends up backfiring on them. Yeah. You know what I mean? It just keeps, it just blows up what their true intentions are. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so, I mean, it's helped. All the negative press has helped.
It definitely helped.
Because the film is projected to do $150 million domestically.
That's crazy.
You know what I mean? On a $14.5 million budget, it's already $80+ million. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so, and again, it goes back to the point that I mentioned earlier. I think that, the fact that this was essentially done outside of the system. Because like I said, it was financed not by Angel Studio and not by Fox. Like, Tim and that team got independent financiers together to raise that $14.5 million. And then they went to Fox and said, hey, you want to distribute this? And Fox bought the distribution rights, right? And so, but they just never distributed it. So, this was something that was started outside of the system. Then it got into the Hollywood system. And then it didn't get released, but then somebody outside of the Hollywood system came along and said, we'll distribute it, and it blew up to be what it is now. And so those inside the system are saying, well, we're supposed to be the experts. We're supposed to be making these films that are making all of this money. Why is this happening? This shouldn't be. Oh, it's happening because, because this group these fanatics are watching, it's happening because some people donated tickets. So they're trying to find every reason to not justify its success. Why? Why do they have to do that though? Because shareholders at the top at Disney are going to be like, why? I don't care whether they're Christian or whether it's this or that.
Yeah.
I don't see color. I don't see I see green. Right? At the end of the day, investors see green. That's what they want.
Yep.
And so the reason why they got to come up with all of these things is because the investors and the shareholders are saying, why, Disney, did you give away this asset that is now flipped, triple fold?
Yeah.
More than triple fold.
Yep.
But then you have this other asset that came out around the same time, Indiana Jones, $300 million budget that we're going to lose.
Yep. Money
$200+ million on. So in order to keep their shareholders from wringing their necks, it's like, oh, it's because of this, it's because of that, it's because of that's my 2 cents on it. Yeah.
No, that's good. I think that's a good assessment. Yeah, I think they're by trying to hurt it, they're helping.
Yeah. 100%. 100%.
What we're gonna do now, guys, is we're gonna go over to our Patreon exclusive. I got a few more questions specifically about his life story, the first one being changed into a movie, why he couldn't use some of the details from his real life in this fictional story called Chameleon. And then I'm also curious about your work with the trafficking world, about this whole, like, is this a conspiracy? Is it not? The whole adrenal blood stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
So meet us over there on Patreon. Okay, so
Hey, if you want to see the extended version of this podcast, completely unedited, consider partnering with us in our online community for as little as $5 a month. In exchange, you get access to these podcasts as we stream them live before anyone else gets to see them. You get access to the replay of our daily after party streams, access to our private Discord server, access to discount codes, and so much more. So help us continue contextualizing the gospel through media, podcasting, and YouTube, and partner with us for as little as $5 a month. Also, be sure to follow us on the Spotify podcast app, on Facebook, and on Instagram. We're constantly posting content there that I think you'll find extremely valuable. All right, I'll see you over there. Peace.